Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis and we'll be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn the halachos of Krias HaTorah. We pick up today on the top line of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph Siman Kuf Lamed Hey Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber, Kohen Kairei B'Torah Rishon. The Kohen, literally the words of the Mechaber mean the Kohen reads from the Torah first, Va'acharov Levi. After the Kohen reads from the Torah, then the Levi reads from the Torah, Va'acharov Yisroel, and then finally a Yisroel reads from the Torah. So first of all, this Mechaber here in Sif Gimel is going back on what we learned yesterday. We're discussing the halachos of Sheni, Chamishi, and Shabbos Mincha. The Krias HaTorah Monday morning, Thursday morning, and Shabbos afternoon, where we learned yesterday you're only allowed to have 3 aliyahs. You're not allowed to make chaysafas. You're not allowed to have more than 3 aliyahs because of bittul malacha, tircha de tzibura. We're not allowed to take away time from the tzibur, and we're not allowed to have less than 3 aliyahs. Going back on that halacha, the Mechaber now tells me that the format of those 3 aliyahs are Kohen, Levi, and Yisroel. But note the way the Mechaber says it. The Mechaber says, Kohen Kairei B'Torah Rishon. The Kohen reads from the Torah first. Of course, that's because back in the day, the minig was not like the minig that we have now. Nowadays, we have a Bal Kairei. The Bal Kairei is the one who lanes, who actually reads from the Sefer Torah. The one who has the aliyah is the one who comes up to the Sefer Torah, makes the bracha on the Sefer Torah. He's supposed to read from the Sefer Torah as well, but he may not know how to lane, so the Bal Kairei is the one who reads out loud. Back in the day of the Mechaber, it was actually the Oila, the one who had the aliyah, actually was the one who laned, and that's why the words of the Mechaber indicate that the Kohen, the Levi, and the Yisroel are all actually reading from the Sefer Torah. Be that as it may, let's take a look at what's behind the halacha of the Mechaber. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and test. Kohen Kairei B'Torah Rishon. The Kohen reads from the Sefer Torah first, and according to our minig, he's the one who gets the first aliyah. What is this based on? Diksiv, because it's a pasuk in Chumash that says Vikidashtoi. We are supposed to be mekadesh. We sanctify the Kohen. In what way are we mekadesh the Kohen? The Kiblu Chazal, this is a Gemara in Gittin. Those are now learning Daf Yomi. You have a little while to go. It's a Gemara on Nun Tes Amud Aleph, but this is a Gemara in Gittin. The Kiblu Chazal, wa Makabel Sheroit Saloimar, what the pasuk wants to say is L'chol Davar Shebikdusha, that we honor the Kohen in the context of every Davar Shebikdusha. And the Chavetz Chaim gives us some examples over here. First one is Liftayach Rishon. Now, literally, those words mean to open first. What does Liftayach Rishon mean? Liftayach Rishon means that by any Davar Shebikdusha, whether it's people are learning together, whether it's davening, whether it's an aliyah, Liftayach Rishon, the Kohen is the Yoshev Rosh. The Kohen is the one who's first, the L'chol Milei Shebikdusha. So if there are aliyahs to be given out, the Kohen is going to be the one who gets the first aliyah. Ulevarich Rishon. So too, when it comes to being moitzi the tzibur with a bracha. So let's say you're making a mezumin. Let's say you're benching, and there's going to be somebody who's going to lead the benching. You offer it to the Kohen first. Valitel mana yafa Rishon. He also is offered a portion first. So you're sitting down to a Suda, and you have a platter of food. The platter of food goes to the Kohen first. You let the Kohen select first. Now, what's interesting about that third example, that the Kohen takes a portion first, is that doesn't seem to have anything to do with L'chol Davar Shebikdusha. The Chavetz Chaim opened up his cut and test by telling me we learned this from Vikidashtoi. Vikidashtoi sounds very much like we are specifically addressing Dvarim Shebikdusha. So to lead the benching, yes. To get the first aliyah, yes. To speak first by a Sudas Mitzvah, yes. But what does that have to do with being offered the platter of schnitzel first? So the truth is that if you look at the Gemara in Gittin and you look at the Rush, that's not the way the Rush understands L'chol davar shebikdusha. The way the Rush seems to understand L'chol davar shebikdusha is that anything that's covered, anything that makes the Kohen more mechubed, anything that we can do to show that the Kohen has an elevated status, that's what we do. How does that come from the word from vikidashtoi? Because it is axiomatic that if somebody has an elevated level of kedusha, we therefore have to elevate him. But we have to treat him with kavod in every way. Not only things that have to do with kedusha, right? It's not a davar shebekdusha to hold the door for somebody. But if the Rosh Hashiva is coming up the steps, you step aside, you hold the door open for him. If the Rebbe is carrying some bags, you go and you run and you take the bags away from the Rebbe. If there's a simcha and you see a Rebbe waiting by a shmorg, to get something to eat, you tell the Rebbe, please have a seat and I'll go bring you food. And you load up plates from everything from the shmorg because you don't know what he might want and you bring it to him. Now that's not a davar shebekdusha. But the reason you're doing it is because vikidashtoi. You are showing that he has an elevated level of kedusha, and that elevated level of kedusha makes him roi, worthy for the honor that you are bestowing upon him. That is vikidashtoi. You are demonstrating that he has an elevated level of kedusha. Now, continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, the first wide line here in the Mishnah Berurah, in the middle of the line, he says, nevertheless, although we see that we do have this obligation to treat the Kohen with kavod, let's say you have a Kohen, and the Kohen has a Rebbe, and the Kohen's a Rebbe, the Kohen's Rav is there. Or it could be not even a Rebbe or a Rav, but there's a Talmid Chacham in the room, and the Kohen is not a Talmid Chacham. So if the Kohen wants to give kavod to the Talmid Chacham, harishus biyadai, he may do so. Now, from this Mishnah Berurah, it sounds very much like the Kohen is only allowed to be moichel on his kavod and give kavod to somebody else if that other person is bigger than him. What if the other person is not bigger than him? What if the other person is a peer who happens to be a Yisroel? Is he allowed to be moichel and say, no, it's okay, you take first? So over here it sounds like not. In other places in the Mishnah Berurah, it sounds like yes. But when it comes to a Kohen being moichel on his kavod, in the context of the aliyahs in shul, tiknu chazal mipnei darkei shalom she'ein ha-Kohen va-Levi yichoilin limchol. In that context, not the Kohen, not the Levi, they are not allowed to be moichel on their kavod. So if there's a Kohen Amoritz in the shul, and there's a Talmid Chacham in the shul, and the Gabbai goes, Kohen Krav Yamoid, and he points to the Kohen, and the Kohen wants to say, no, give the first aliyah to the Talmid Chacham, and the Talmid Chacham is Yisroel, that he may not do. And the Mishnah Berurah says that the Chazal were masakin is mipnei darkei shalom. What's pshat mipnei darkei shalom? It's very simple. Because if we're going to start a precedent where the Kohen and the Levi could be moichel on their kavod so that somebody else should get the first aliyah, so now what's going to happen? The Gabbai is going to come over to the Kohen, and the Gabbai is going to tell the Kohen, look, I would give you Kohen, but Reb Pliny is in the shul, so I'm going to give it to Reb Pliny. Then the next week, I would give you the first aliyah, but Mr. So-and-so is in the shul, and he gives the shul a lot of money, so I'm going to give him the aliyah. Then the next week, it's, so-and-so is in the shul, and he's the Rav's son-in-law, and, I'll kavod of the Rav, I want to give the son-in-law. Then you have somebody else sitting in the shul who says, wait a second, all of these people are getting the first aliyah instead of the Kohen. How about me? I've been saying a daf yomi share for the last 3 years. What, I've been a nobody? I also should get the first aliyah. And suddenly it becomes that the first aliyah is a judgment call. Who's bigger and who's not? So now you could very easily understand the machlokesim that are going to rage in shul. So the Chachamim said nothing doing. It is a fixed fact. The first aliyah goes to the Kohen, the second aliyah goes to the Levi. I didn't see it myself, but I'm told that the Dirshu Zatzal, Rav Moshe Zechet Tzaddik Kodesh Levracha, was very, very much against the minig in some shuls where they asked the Kohen to step outside so that they could give somebody else the first aliyah. And they say that that's not, now the Kohen's not even in the shul. Yeah, but why isn't he in the shul? Because you asked him to step aside. No, the Kohen does not step aside. What Chazal were Masakid was that the first aliyah goes to the Kohen, the second aliyah goes to the Levi, even if there are bigger people in the room. And the Mishnah Berurah spells this out now. He says, the Kohen and the Levi cannot be meichel on their covet. Eladafka Kohen kaira rishain. Dafka, the Kohen should get the first aliyah, the acharav Levi, and after him the Levi should get the second aliyah, the acharav Yisroel, and then third the Yisroel should get his aliyah, kedei shelo yavai adavar lidei machlokes, so that it should not come to machlokes in the shul. Shekol echad yomer ani gadol ve'ekra rishain. You're going to start having, everyone's going to say, me, I should get the first aliyah. And in the context of this halacha, there's no difference between a Monday, a Thursday, a Shabbos afternoon, a Shabbos morning, a Yom Tov. The Kohen gets the first aliyah, the Levi gets the second aliyah, Yisroel gets the third aliyah. That's the way it is, and we don't make changes. Im ein Kohen bebeis hakneses. Now, what do you do if there is no Kohen? Says the Mishnah Berurah, holchen achar hagadol b'chachma uminyan. Then you look around the shul, and it's not up for grabs. It's not, there's no Kohen, so now we'll give it to whoever we want. No, the Mishnah Berurah says if there's no Kohen, you give it to the one who is the biggest, b'chachma, in wisdom, u'v'minyan, and in number. What does that mean? Chachma is chachmas HaTorah. You look for a bigger Talmid Chacham. Minyan, it seems, means the number of Talmidim that they have. So if you have two Talmidei Chachamim who seem to be equal, but one has more Talmidim than the other, you give it to the one who has more Talmidim. And this is true even if there's somebody else who's older. So if there's a Kohen, you give it to the Kohen. If there's no Kohen, you look for a big Talmid Chacham, the biggest Talmid Chacham in the room. If there's more than one Talmid Chacham, and they have Talmidim, and one has more Talmidim than the other, so fine. So you give it to the one who's a Talmid Chacham and has more Talmidim. And all of this trumps age. Age is not the deciding factor here. Ois cut and Yud, v'acharav Levi. The second aliyah goes to a Levi. Now the fact that the first aliyah goes to the Kohen, we learned that out from the pasuk of Vikidashtoi. Vikidashtoi is talking specifically about Kohanim. How do we know that there's an Indian to elevate the Levi, that the Levi should get the second aliyah? It says v'acharav Levi, v'asmechinu akra. The Chazal based this on a pasuk. It's not a daraisa. The Magen Avraham says that v'kidashtoi by a Kohen, the Indian that we're mechabed the Kohen with the first aliyah and with benching, etc., etc. The Magen Avraham says that's a daraisa. We learn that from v'kidashtoi. We learn that from a pasuk. It's a real drasha, says the Magen Avraham. It's a daraisa. But the Levi, not so. The Chavetz Chaim says, "Vasmechinu akra." This is an asmachta. It means that the Chazal based it on a pasuk, but it's not a real drasha. It's not a real daraisa. Vasmechinu akra, because the pasuk says, "Vayitna el haKohanim b'nei Levi." That pasuk, Dvarim Lamed Aleph Tes. I think that's talking about Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer Torah. Let me see. Dvarim Lamed Aleph Tes. Vayichtov Moshe es HaTorah hazois. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Torah Kedosha. Vayitna el haKohanim b'nei Levi. He gave it to the Kohanim, the sons of Levi. Hanoisim es Aaron bris Hashem, who carried the Aaron vel kol ziknei Yisrael, and to all of the Zikanim of Yisroel. Now, it's very odd. The Torah says HaKohanim b'nei Levi. Now, we know that the Kohanim came from Levi. We know that all Kohanim come from Levi. So why doesn't it just say Vayitna el Kohanim? Why does it have to identify the Kohanim as Bnei Levi? Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Vasbechinu akrod ikseva yitna Kohanim Bnei Levi. Atu anan lo yadina the Kohanim Bnei Levi ninu." Don't we know that the Kohanim are children of Levi, that they're descendants of Levi? Why does the Torah have to identify the Kohanim as Bnei Levi? Ela la'ashmi'inan demitchila Kohanim. The pasuk says, "Vayitna ela Kohanim." The Kohanim come first, and then Bnei Levi, and then the Bnei Levi, v'hadar Bnei Levi. This comes to teach us that we should be mechabed Kohanim first, and then after we're mechabed the Kohanim, we should be mechabed the Leviim. Okay, now we go to the second line here in the Shulchan Aruch Sif Dalet. Says the Mechaber, Haminig HaPoshet. The Poshet and Minig is Sha'afilu Kayin Ama Oretz, even a Kayin who's unlearned, a Kayin Ama Oretz, Kaidim Likrois, he comes first, he has Kedima, preference for the first aliyah, Lifnei Chacham Gadol Yisroel, before a Talmud Chacham who's a Gadol. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Yud Aleph, Haminig HaPoshet. What does the Shulchan Aruch mean? What does the Mechaber mean that's the Minig HaPoshet? That's the given, that's the basic Minig. What does he mean with this language? Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Mechaber wants to say is, after Harbe Rishonim Sovereign, even though there are many Rishonim, and in the Sharit Zion he brings down over here, he says, take a look at the Beis Yosef and the Bir Agra, who bring down several Rishonim who hold this way. After Harbe Rishonim Sovereign, even though many Rishonim hold, the Loinasa Takanazu, Lahaktem Ama Oretz Lefnei HaChacham. Many Rishonim hold that when the Chachamim were Mesakin, based on the pasuk of Vikidashtai, which the Magen Avram says is a daraisa, when the Chachamim said that because of Vikidashtai, the Kohen comes before everybody else, it wasn't intended that a Kohen Amaretz should come before a Talmud Chacham. We know Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber says it's a minig pashut that we go to the Kohen first, before a Gadol Sheba Yisroel. Says the Chavetz Chaim, what does he mean it's a minig pashut? What he means is, there are Rishonim who hold not that way, but Mikamakayim nevertheless, Haminig Ka'paiskim Shesayvrin, the Le'inyan Krias HaTorah Bebeis HaKnesses, the minig is that we follow the paiskim that hold that in the context of an aliyah to the Torah in shul, mipnei darkei shalom lo yichilku bazeh. When it comes to an aliyah in shul, because of darkei shalom, you see how far Chazal went, that we're not going to risk machlokes. You see from over here, Rabbi say, how terrible and dangerous machlokes in shul is. You know, Chazal say that when Klal Yisrael gets together to daven, if they come together in shul and they're ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, then the Rebbeinu Shalom listens to their tefillas. But if they come to shul and there's kitata between them, if there's machlokes between them, then the Satan comes and the Satan says, look, they're b'nei machlokes, they're b'nei riv, and convinces the Rebbeinu Shalom chas v'chalila not to listen to the tefillas. So we're very, very, very careful here about machlokes. V'kidashtoi, the Magen Avram says is a daraisa. The Kohen should get the first aliyah. Then again, it's very odd to say that a Kohen Amorit should get an aliyah before a Talmud Chacham, Kavod Torah, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. But we're risking machlokes. If we're going to give the Talmud Chacham Yisroel before the Kohen, now there's going to be machlokes. Somebody else is going to say, I'm also a Talmud Chacham. I also should get the first aliyah. We can't risk machlokes. So even though there are Rishonim that hold that way, our minig, we paskin like those that say, the Le'inyan Krias HaTorah Bebeis HaKnesses, mipnei darkei shalom lo yichilku bazeh. Ois Katan Yud Beis, and this applies even lifnei Chacham Gadol, even in the presence of a real Gadol. The Eid kan bezayin lekavod HaTorah, and there's no bezayin HaTorah here. Don't come to me and argue, kavod HaTorah, it's a bezayin for the Torah, you're giving this Kohen Amoritz an aliyah before the Talmud Chacham. No, the Kevin Shekein HaMinig, and kan bizoy. Since that's the minig, no one is going to look and say, we're giving kavod to the Amoritz before the Talmud Chacham. No, why did he get the aliyah? Because he's a Kohen. No one's going to come into shul and say, okay, So an Amoritz comes before a Talmid Chacham. No, they're going to say, well, yeah, of course he got the aliyah. He's a Kohen. What do you want? Don't worry about the Talmid Chacham. He got Shlishi. Okay, so let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch here now in Sif Dalet. We're now 3 lines down. We're up to the words of the Ramah Umi. No. I'm sorry. We're on the 2nd line down, the last word in the Shulchan Aruch, Vehu. The Mechaber just finished saying that the minig apashat, the minig that we follow, is that a Kohen Ha'aretz has kedima for the first aliyah before a Yisroel who's a Talmid Chacham, even a Gadol. Now the Mechaber qualifies that halacha a little bit. He says, Vehu, that's true in a case, Sha'kohen Yodea Likros. That's true if the Kohen who's an Ha'aretz at least is able to read from the Sefer Torah. Remember again what I mentioned at the beginning of the shir. It's clear from the Mechaber that the Mechaber is living in the world where the aliyah, where the oila, the one who gets the aliyah, was the one who actually read from the Sefer Torah. That's why the Mechaber started off Siv Gimel and he said Kohen Koirei Bat Torah Rishon. He didn't say Kohen Oile La Torah Rishon. He said Kohen Koirei Bat Torah Rishon. The Kohen reads from the Sefer Torah first. That's why now the Mechaber says, yes, we give a Kohen Ha'aretz Kedima to read from the Sefer Torah first before a Yisroel who's a Talmid Chacham. Says the Mechaber, that's assuming that the Kohen knows how to read. If the Kohen is not able to read from the Sefer Torah, then we're not going to give him the first aliyah. He's not eligible. He can't read from the Sefer Torah. So again, that's why the Mechaber says here, V'hu she'akohen yodea likros. That's if the Kohen knows how to read. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cutting Yud Gimel yodea likros b'toich haksav. The Kohen has to know how to read from the letters of the Sefer Torah. Kidel kaman Siman Kov Lamed Tesiv Beis. What the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here is, when the Mechaber says that the Kohen has to know how to read, it's not enough. Let's say they're giving him the first aliyah in Parshas Nasai. So somebody told the Kohen, listen, this week you're going to get the first aliyah in Parshas Nasai. I know you don't know how to read. I know you don't know the Hebrew alphabet. I'll teach you how to recite the first aliyah of Parshas Nasai by heart. I'll teach it to you Baal Peh. You have an excellent memory. I'll teach it to you Baal Peh. You'll rattle it off Baal Peh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. When the Mechaber says that the Kohen has to know how to read, he means that the Kohen has to know how to read mitoich haksav. He has to know how to read the letters from the Sefer Torah. Why? Because we're going to learn later that the Baal Koreh has to read from the Sefer Torah. The Baal Koreh is not allowed to learn by heart. He has to read from the Sefer Torah. Now, this really goes back to something that we mentioned yesterday, which was that Moshe Rabbeinu was misaken that we shouldn't go 3 days without Torah. We asked the Kachi yesterday, what do you mean? I'm not going 3 days without Torah anyway. I'm going to say Krias HaTorah twice a day. And the Rambam says that you could be Yotze, your Chiyuv of Talmud Torah in minimalist fashion by saying Krias HaTorah twice a day. That's Perek Echad Shachris, Perek Echad Arvis. In a very, 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 very minimalist fashion, you're Yotze your Chiyuv of Talmud Torah. So even without learning, I'm not going 3 days without Torah. And we said the answer for the Prima Godim is that no, it's not just that we're worried you're going to go 3 days without learning Torah. It's also going 3 days without hearing Torah from a Sefer Torah. There's something about hearing Torah read mitoich haksav from a Sefer Torah. We don't want you going 3 days without that. We also saw the magic of the ksav of the Sefer Torah when we learned about Hagba. We said if you look into the Sefer Torah and you see the letters and you read the letters of the Sefer Torah, the Magen Avram told us about this Or Gadol, this great light that you could become infused with by reading from the Sefer Torah. So this all goes hand in hand. So when does the Kohen Ha'aretz get kedima over the Yisroel who's a Talmid Chacham? If the Kohen Ha'aretz is able to read. If the Kohen Ha'aretz can't read, then not. Now, the Ramah is going to qualify the Mechaber. So first we had the Mechaber who said, Kohen Ha'aretz, he gets kedima, even over Yisroel who's a Talmid Chacham. Then the Mechaber qualified it, and he said, well, that's only if the Kohen knows how to read. But if the Kohen doesn't know how to read, then he doesn't get kedima. Now, says the Ramah, 3rd line down in the Shulchan Aruch, Umiu. Im yuchal likrois im ashliach tzibor mila b'mila. Let's say the Kohen Amaretz Taka can't read mitach ksav. He doesn't know how to read the letters of the Sefer Torah, but he could repeat word for word after the Baal Koreh. The Ramah says that's enough, even though he's not reading mitach ksav. Kidl Kamon Siman Kuf Lamites, like we're going to see an opinion like that, the Siman Kuf Lamites as well. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yodalid. Sagi Bekach, that's enough. V'hainu davka b'she'en sham kayin acher zulasai sheyuchal likrais ba'atzmai k'mavur sham. However, cautions the Chavetz Chaim, when the Ramah says that you could call up a kayin even before a Talmid Chacham, even if he can't read mitach ksav, he's only going to repeat word for word from the Baal Koreh. Of course, that's only if there isn't another kayin who does know how to read. If there's another kayin who knows how to read, certainly you should give the aliyah to that kayin first. Now, let's go weiter in the Mechaber. Now says the Mechaber 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down the middle of the line, right by the Ois Cut and Tesvav for the Mishnah Berurah. The Mechaber explains his opinion. The Mechaber said, look, I told you that you don't give Kedima to a Kohen unless he knows how to read. Explains the Mechaber, Shem Eini Yedei Likrais, because if the Kohen doesn't know how to read, hey, Yach Yivarech Ala Torah. How is he making a bracha? How is he going up to the Torah and making brachas? What's he making a bracha on? The bracha is on the mitzvah of reading from the Sefer Torah. How's he making a bracha on reading from the Sefer Torah if he doesn't know how to read? So says the Mechaber, that's why I'm telling you he has to know how to read. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. It's cut in Tezvav. Shem Eina Yedea, says the Chavetz Chaim. Ukayim, nowadays, Noihagin Likroisai, Afapi She'eina Yedea Likrois, Nowadays, we give a Kohen an aliyah, even if he doesn't know how to read mitach haksav. He doesn't know the Hebrew letters. He doesn't know how to read. As long as he could repeat mila b'mila from the Baal Koreh, we give him the aliyah. And furthermore, says the Chavetz Chaim, an even bigger kula. And even when it comes to that, we're not knowing to be very careful about it. In other words, it's not pshat that before we give somebody an aliyah, we have to say, you'll be able, you know how to read? No, you don't know how to read? Okay, are you going to be able to repeat word for word from the Baal Koreh? Make sure you say with the Baal Koreh. No, we're not knowing to be medactic. We assume that the guy could probably repeat word for word after the Baal Koreh. So, to summarize what we just had over here in Sif Daled, we opened up Sif Daled by saying that the Kohen gets Kedima, even to the extent that a Kohen Amaretz comes before a Yisroel who's a Talmid Chacham, who's Mamish Gadol. That's the opening of Siman Daled. Then we brought in a concept where the Mechaber said, hold it. That's only if the Kohen knows how to read. Mitach Haksav. Why? Because you get an aliyah. You have to be able to read Mitach Haksav. Why do you have to be able to read Mitach Haksav? Because if you can't read Mitach Haksav, how are you making a bracha? That's what the Mechaber said. Said the Ramah, not so fast. He doesn't have to be able to read Mitach Haksav. As long as he could repeat after the Baal Koreh, mila b'mila, that's enough. Why is that enough? How's the Ramah answering the argument of the Mechaber? The Mechaber says, how are you making a bracha if you can't read Mitach Haksav? The answer seems to be Shemei Kohen. The Ramah is saying that the oiler who gets up and listens carefully to the Baal Koreh and repeats after the Baal Koreh, he's yotze through Shemei Kohen. Okay, if it's Shemei Kohen, why does he have to verbalize it? If it's Shemei Kohen, why does he even have to see it? Let him just listen. Not sure. And then the Chavetz Chaim says, Lamaisa, we definitely give an aliyah even if the person can't read Mitach Haksav. Not only that, we even give an aliyah. We don't have to be so medactic if he could repeat word for word after the Baal Koreh. We could assume we're giving a guy an aliyah. We assume that he knows how to repeat word for word after the Baal Koreh, and we don't have to be so medactic. That's what comes out. Okay, Sif Hey. 3 lines from the bottom here on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Im ha-Sefer Torah pasuach. You took out the Sefer Torah, you put the Sefer Torah down on the bima. That's what the Mechaber says. You opened up the Sefer Torah. But says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Tezayin Im ha-Sefer Torah pasuach. Hu adin afilu adayin lo yotziu ha-Sefer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the halacha that we're about to say here in Sif Hey applies not only if you already took out the Sefer Torah and opened it, even if you didn't take out the Sefer Torah yet. Let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch. Im ha-Sefer Torah pasuach, if the Sefer Torah is already opened, or like the Mishnah Berurah says, oh no, even if it's not already opened, but you're already ready to take the Sefer Torah out of the Aron. V'ha-Kohen kareh Shema. You have one Kohen in the room, and the Kohen is in the middle of Krias Shema. What do you do now? Ein rashay lahafsik. The Kohen is not allowed to be mafsik in Krias Shema in order to take an aliyah, and therefore v'kayrim Yisroel b'mkaymai, and therefore we call up Yisroel instead of the Kohen. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut into Zayin and Sefer Torah pasuach. Hu adin afilu adayin lo yotziu Sefer Torah. This halacha applies even if you didn't take the Sefer Torah out yet. Gam kein ein mamtinin milahitzi Sefer Torah ad sheyigmar Kohen tfilasai. In other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, you have a minion. You have one Kohen. The Kohen came late. The Kohen is sitting, he's saying Krias Shema. You're up to Krias HaTorah. You might think that the Gabbai should give a clap, and the Gabbai should say, listen, we're waiting for 5 minutes, because we have to wait for Reb Yankel Cohen, we have to wait for him to catch up to us, because he's a Kohen, and we have to give him the first aliyah. Says the Mechaber, no, he's not allowed to be mafsik, and we don't wait for him. If he was allowed to be mafsik, he'd be mafsik. He's not allowed to be mafsik. We're not going to wait for him. Tircha de tzibura. We're not going to wait for him. Says the Mishnah Berurah weiter. Mishum tircha de tzibura. We don't wait for the Kohen. Tircha de tzibura. Eis katan Yud Zayin ein rashay. He's not allowed to be mafsik in Krias Shema to take the aliyah. Va'afilu l'deya harishayna b'siman samach vav siv dalet shamafsik. Even though we did have an opinion earlier on in Siman samach vav siv dalet that said that a Kohen is allowed to be mafsik in Krias Shema to take an aliyah, hainu kishikarauhu. That's a different case. Over there, the case is the Gabbai looked around. He saw Yankel Cohen across the room. He doesn't know that he's holding in the middle of Krias Shema, and he called him up. Oh, he already called him up. So then we had a sheet in Siman Samach Vav that said that the Kohen is allowed to take the aliyah because he was already called up. It wouldn't be covered Torah for the Kohen to sit there and not come when they called him up to the Torah. But lechatchila, certainly you shouldn't call him up if he's in the middle of Krias Shema. Or bishum pegama the Kohen, as you might make an argument. Wait a second, how could the Kohen not be mafsik? People might look at him and say, "Oh, he's not. They're not giving him the aliyah for Kohen. Must be he's not a kosher Kohen. There must be something wrong with his yichus, with his lineage." Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, we don't have to worry about that. And we should pegama the Kohen sheyomer olav shein a Kohen lekel amechash. We don't have to worry about that. Why? Because they see he's saying Krias Shema or he's davening Shmoneh Esrei. And the Achrayim agree to lav dafka Shema, that this halacha that the Kohen can't be mafsik to take the aliyah is not only by Krias Shema. The same halacha applies to Birchas Krias Shema between Baruch Hu and Shmoneh Esrei, that he can't be mafsik to take the aliyah. He says, take a look earlier in Hilchos Krias Shema in Siman Samach Vav Shehechranu, where we were machriya, we came to the decision the yesh lahakel likroisei lechatchila kishu oimed ben aprakim ve'ein sham kayin acher. He says we were machriya in Siman Samach Vav that if there's only one kayin in the shul and the kayin is holding in the middle of Birchas Krias Shema, but he's holding in a place that we call Bein HaPrakim, between the chapters. So let's say he just said Baruch Atah Hashem Yoitzer HaMa'oros. So he's holding in between the first bracha of Krias Shema and the second bracha, Avarabba. So over there, we're allowed to call him up for an aliyah, even lechatchila. Certainly if a Kohen is the only Kohen in the room and he's in the middle of Psukei de Zimra, you're allowed to call him up for a aliyah. Okay, let's go weiter. 2 lines from the bottom. The Ramah, Hagah, V'chein b'tainis sha'achar Pesach v'sukkis, so too by Bahab. See, the words of the Ramah is by the fast days after Pesach and Sukkis. What is that? That's Bahab. Sheni, Chamishi, Sheni. That's the first Monday, Thursday, and Monday after Rosh Chodesh, after Pesach or after Sukkot, when many have the minig to fast, to say slichas. So he says on one of those fast days, Shekayrin Vayichal, when you lay in Vayichal, Imein HaKohen Misana, if there's a Kohen in the room, but he's not fasting, so he's not entitled to an aliyah. The only reason you're having this laning of Vayichal is because it's a tainis tzibur. But if somebody is not fasting, he doesn't get the aliyah. Currently, Yisroel, you would call up a Yisroel instead. In that case, it would be better that the Kohen should step out of the shul. If the Kohen does not step out of the shul, but the Kohen is not fasting on Bahab, you could still give a Yisroel who's fasting the aliyah. Since the Kohen is not entitled to the aliyah because he's not fasting. But Lamaisa, it's better if the Kohen should step out. Why? If the halacha is that we could give the Yisroel the aliyah even in the presence of the Kohen, why are we suggesting that the Kohen should step out? Because of the pagam of the Kohen. The Shema Ika Pagama, because there might be a pagam on the Kohen, She'ena Kol Yoden Shu'ena Masana. You see, if a Kohen is saying Krias Shema, so then people understand why he didn't get the aliyah of Kohen. What do you mean? He's sitting and he's saying Krias Shema. But if a Kohen is just sitting there and he doesn't get the aliyah, why is he not getting the aliyah? Because it's Bahab. Not everybody fasts on Bahab. We lay in Vayichal on Bahab, and this Kohen is not fasting. You can't look at the Kohen sitting there and know that he's not fasting. So then people are going to wonder, why isn't he getting the aliyah? Oh, there might be something wrong with his yichus. Certainly if there's a Kohen who is fasting, then the Kohen who's not fasting doesn't have to leave, because no one's going to have a kasha why he didn't get the aliyah. Another Kohen got the aliyah. He should just tell the Gabbai, listen, don't give me the aliyah, I'm not fasting. Kahal Shayunoyagin, this is an interesting meaning now that the Chavetz Chaim brings down. This is a little bit of a tangent. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Kahal Shayunoyagin Mikedem, a shul that had an old established minig. Shebes Shabbos Bereshis, that on Shabbos Parshas Bereshis, Haya Echad Me'akol Misnadev Mois L'tzarech Beis HaKnesses, somebody would give the shul a lot of money, Kedei Sheyikra Rishai B'Askolas HaTorah, so that he should get the schus of getting the first aliyah of the new year. He wants to get the first aliyah of Parshas Bereshis. Now, that's a problem. He's not a Kohen. So it's mamish, it's after Simchas Torah, and you have a Yid, a Yisroel, who was mamish nisragesh. He wants to get the first aliyah of the new reading of Chumash. He wants to get the first aliyah Bereshis Bar Elikim. But he's not a Kohen. Says the Chavetz Chaim, in a shul where they had an old established minig, that somebody would give a lot of money to the shul, and he would get the first aliyah of Parshas Bereshis, the HaKohen eina roitze limchol. And the Kohen says, no way, it's my aliyah. Very nice you're giving $10,000 to the shul. Sorry, Charlie, it's my aliyah. I want my aliyah. Ein choshishin l'dvarav. We do not listen to the Kohen. V'yasu hakol kiminhagam. And the shul should follow their minig. Now, this is only in this case. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Me'achar sheminig kodem hu, since this is an old minig, sheniskan l'chvoid haTorah, that was made l'kavod haTorah. In other words, when you see that a gvir, a nediv, wants to give $10,000 to the shul in order to get the kavod of having the first aliyah of Parshas Bereshis, that's kavod haTorah. So it's an old established minig that was done with kavod haTorah, and it's going to come out from the Mishnah Berurah is going to say soon, and the shul made this minig, everybody agreed to it. Even the Kohanim agreed to it back in the day. Maybe it's 3 generations ago, But at the time that the minig was established in the shul, even the Kohanim agreed. So it's an old established minig. It was made l'kavod Torah. It was originally made with the agreement of the Kohanim. The minig takes precedence, and we allow this nadvin, the one who's giving the money, to take the first aliyah of Bereshis, even over a Kohen. The Krias HaTorah and Brit Chadash agree, Shafilu eina roitza lotzes mibeis hakneses, even if the Kohen refuses to step outside, afal pikein ein chayshishin lozeh. We don't care. The Kohen Yisroel hamisnadav, and we call up the Yisroel who's giving the money. V'hainu dafka b'nidoin kazeh. But says the Chavetz Chaim, that's only in this case. Don't think that Shabbos Parshas Nosai, a Gevir could come in and say, I'm giving $5,000 to the shul, I want Kohen. No such thing. It's only in this case. Shahaya minig kadim, when it was an old established minig, umuskam lakoil, and everybody agreed to it back in the day. Shenase gam b'rishos hakohanim, the minig was established even with the rishos of the Kohanim at that time. Shahaya min hagame olam lotzeis be'eshik Kohen la Yisroel mishum ilu yuchvayda Torah, because they established that the Kohanim should go out in that case to allow the Gvir to get that aliyah mishum ilu yuchvayda Torah, to create kavod Torah shemisnadvin damim yikarim. So you'll see that people give good money bad kriyas psichasa in order to have the schus, to have the first aliyah in the Torah Kedosha. If you'll have a town where they want to make a new minig, limkar mitzvahs, to sell all the aliyahs, including Kohen, shaloi b'rishos haKohanim, without the permission of the Kohanim, v'al Kohanim sheyetzu b'shas shekar b'Torah, and they're going to tell the Kohanim, sorry, you have to go out because we sell Kohen to the highest bidder, she'ein rishos b'yadam. They have no right to do that. It's only in this one case that it works. And this is brought down from a Tshuvas Chasam Sofer. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time at Tzivav. Thank you so much for joining me for Leviim and Torah. The discussion of Leviim and Torah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should sing Yeshua's for us, Parnas, and Shadduchim to those in need. And we should be zeichet to see the Bias Kal Tzedek. B'mehera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.